March 11, 1945. Before dawn breaks over the Pacific, the sea is already alive with sound. Low engines rumble, metal hulls creak, and Japanese radio chatter hisses across the water in broken echoes. Lieutenant Commander Malcolm David stands in the conning tower of the USS Harder, perfectly still, listening. Around him in Blacket Strait near the Solomon Islands, 24 Japanese vessels form a moving wall of steel. Destroyers, cruisers, cargo ships, and fuel tankers. An entire convoy so close that transmissions carry over open water. David has 6 torpedoes left. 6 torpedoes. 24 ships. On paper, this is where submarines die. The formation is a killbox. Destroyers spaced around the perimeter. Depth charges armed. Active sonar sweeping on a strict rhythm, recalibrating and pinging like a metronome. If David fires, the flash and disturbance risk giving him away. If he dives, active sonar can lock on and track him to crush depth. If he surfaces to run, deck guns can shred his hull before he clears the screen. Navy statistics are brutal. Submarines trapped inside enemy formations survive about 12% of the time. David has no escort, no air cover, no backup. He is operating hundreds of miles beyond safe territory. His crew has been submerged for 19 straight hours, and carbon dioxide levels are climbing toward dangerous limits. And yet, in the next 42 minutes, Malcolm David is about to neutralize the convoy without the Japanese ever fully understanding what happened. He will fire from positions submarines are not supposed to reach, reload faster than safety protocols allow, and move between sonar pulses using a technique the Navy itself classifies as suicidal. He will do it because he noticed something no one else did, something that turned Japanese convoy doctrine, its greatest strength, into a fatal blind spot. To understand how that moment became possible, you have to understand the man who created it. Malcolm David was born February 2, 1913 in Portland, Maine. As a child, he didn't just fix clocks, he dismantled them to understand why time behaved the way it did. His father once found him at 7 years old inside a grandfather clock, counting gear rotations like he was reading a secret language. "Everything runs on patterns," the boy said. That idea never left him. When David took command of the USS Harder in June 1942, fresh from the shipyard, standard protocol gave new commanders 2 weeks to learn their boat. David took 72 hours, and he used them like an engineer, not a politician. He measured every timing interval, how long torpedo tube doors took to open, reload cycles under pressure, dive rates under different ballast configurations, the seconds it took crewmen to move between compartments during damage control drills. His executive officer found him one night with a stopwatch, timing sailors as they sprinted and sealed hatches. "Lieutenant Commander," the XO said, worn out, "you've run 17 drills today." David didn't look up from his notebook. 17.6 seconds to flood the negative tank. He answered, "Unacceptable. We do it again." Harder's first patrol in August 1942 came with cautious orders. Reconnaissance only. Observe shipping lanes. Avoid engagement. 5 days in, sonar picked up a Japanese destroyer conducting a routine sweep. Textbook procedure said, stay deep, stay quiet, let it pass. David did something else. He watched the destroyer long enough to see the truth hiding in plain sight. Its patrol loop repeated every 11 minutes with mechanical precision. On the 3rd repetition, David surfaced directly behind the destroyer's wake during a brief recalibration gap between sonar pings. 2 torpedoes. 2 hits. The destroyer sank in 4 minutes. David dove before the response could close in. His after-action report was cold and simple. Enemy follows predictable timing. Predictability is vulnerability. Pacific Fleet Command noted the unorthodox tactic and filed it as reckless luck. They would regret underestimating him. In December 1942, near Rabaul Harbor, David was ordered to intercept a supply convoy, cargo ships guarded by destroyers. Standard doctrine demanded attacking from maximum range and retreating immediately. David closed dangerously close, tightening the distance until the crew thought he'd miscalculated. But David had noticed something. Japanese destroyers protected the perimeter because they assumed submarines attacked from outside. Nobody expected a submarine inside the formation. From a blind spot between overlapping sonar cones, David fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession. All 6 hit. While escorts scrambled to find the source, Harder executed a maneuver the crew had practiced until it was muscle memory. Emergency dive deep, reverse course, go silent, and slip beneath the convoy's own propeller noise, like a shadow under thunder. Depth charges fell into empty water. David's report stated the key. Japanese defense prioritizes perimeter control, creating exploitable gaps at close range. This time, Pacific Fleet Command paid attention. Over the months that followed, David refined the method and proved it wasn't luck, it was math. At Truk Lagoon, intelligence tagged a Japanese light cruiser as protected by minefields, submarine nets, and constant patrols. Command labeled it unreachable. David studied tide charts for weeks and found that on specific spring tides, pressure changes made the net sag just enough, mere inches, to create a narrow window. He brought Harder through that gap with almost no clearance, holding perfect depth control for minutes that felt like hours, then used the acoustic shadow of merchant engine noise to mask his approach. Torpedoes ran true. The target capsized. David slipped back out through the same gap before dawn. The Navy awarded him the Navy Cross. David's response was almost insulting in its calm. Just math. In October 1943, radio intelligence suggested a Japanese submarine tender was operating near Mindanao. Valuable, rare, and always protected. Tenders moved unpredictably, Command claimed. David didn't accept that word. He cross-referenced partially decoded patrol schedules with sighting reports and discovered the tender's logic. It wasn't wandering, it was answering resupply requests on a cycle. He waited at the predicted coordinates. The tender arrived where his calculations said it would, escorted by destroyers. David shadowed them for hours, mapping sonar sweeps down to the second until he found the gap. Brief moments when all escorts faced away at once. During the next gap, he closed in and fired. The tender went down, taking critical repair capacity with it. Destroyers counterattacked. David dove deeper than recommended safe depth and crawled away while the hull groaned and the crew held their breath. He watched a depth gauge and stopwatch like a man timing the heartbeat of a monster. After minutes of explosions and silence, Harder surfaced later, undamaged. All of it built toward March 11th, 1945. Blacket Strait, 24 ships, 6 torpedoes. Return to that moment. David had tracked the convoy for hours, not chasing it, studying it. The convoy moved in a nested box formation, an outer ring of destroyers, a middle ring of cargo ships, and an inner ring of fuel tankers. Their positions rotated every 14 minutes, a defensive tactic designed to ruin targeting solutions. Constant motion meant submarines couldn't predict where a ship would be when a torpedo arrived. Except David realized the rotation wasn't random. It was synchronized replacement, clockwork. Ship A moved to Ship B's position, Ship B to Ship C's in a fixed pattern. Map it once and you knew where every ship would be at every moment. David spent 4 hours building that map. He now had a schedule of ship positions for the next hour, accurate to seconds. But knowing where they would be didn't solve the core problem. 6 torpedoes can't sink 24 ships, unless you don't try to sink them. David's plan wasn't to destroy the convoy. It was to make the convoy destroy itself. He briefed the crew with a tone that left no room for fear. "We're going inside the formation. I call positions. You fire on my mark. No questions. No hesitation. We'll have seconds before they triangulate. We fire. We move. We fire again." The executive officer asked the obvious. "Sir, 6 torpedoes!" David cut him off. "They won't be sinking ships," he said. "They'll be sinking discipline." David took harder between 2 rotating cargo ships during a position exchange, using the moment when both ships moved and attention shifted to navigation. The first torpedo struck the bow area of a lead destroyer, not to sink it, but to cripple it. The destroyer lost steering and communications and began drifting into the rotation path. Chaos started immediately because Japanese doctrine demanded immediate response. Destroyers converged toward the assumed firing point, dropping depth charges and tightening a sonar net. But the convoy was still rotating, ships still moving into scheduled positions, and now a crippled destroyer was sliding into their paths like a loose gear in a machine. While escorts scrambled, David shifted position and tucked into the acoustic shadow of a cargo ship, using Japanese propeller noise to hide from Japanese sonar. The second torpedo struck a tanker's stern, damaging rudder and propulsion. The tanker didn't sink. It drifted, helpless. Now 2 disabled ships sat inside a system built on constant motion. The rotation broke. Captains faced an impossible choice: maintain schedule and risk collision, or break formation and create gaps. Several ships broke formation to avoid the drifting tanker. Those gaps were everything David needed. While destroyers depth charged the first firing position, David wasn't there. He was already elsewhere inside the confusion, positioned between arguing vessels whose captains fought over right-of-way on the radio. Torpedoes 3 and 4 followed, spaced close, each designed to disable rather than instantly kill. One ruptured a cargo ship's holds, another wrecked a destroyer's propulsion. 4 ships disabled. Still, not many sunk. But the formation, its discipline, its timing, was collapsing. Then the convoy commander made the fatal decision. He ordered all ships to stop, establish a defensive perimeter, locate the submarine, kill it. It sounded reasonable. It was exactly what David wanted. A submarine moving slowly beneath stationary ships becomes almost impossible to isolate because its sound dissolves into the ambient roar of idling engines and swirling screws. With the convoy stopped, David crept at low speed beneath a merchant keel, using the hull above him as a physical shield against sonar angles. He positioned between destroyers whose sonar cones created a brief recurring gap as they adjusted. The 5th torpedo targeted a fuel tanker carrying aviation fuel, this time for maximum damage. The hit triggered a violent detonation. Fire spilled across the surface like liquid daylight. Nearby ships ignited. Crews panicked and abandoned ship. The convoy now had multiple crises at once: hunt the submarine, fight fires, rescue sailors, maintain order. Attention split, coordination fractured, and David still had 1 torpedo left. Above him, remaining destroyers were operational. But operational didn't mean effective. Orders conflicted. Some chased a ghost. Others tried to rescue burning crews. One destroyer moved through debris with sonar offline, focused on not colliding. David slid beneath it and prepared the final shot. Torpedo 6 wasn't aimed like a typical kill. David targeted a gap between destroyers so the torpedo could run through and strike a cargo ship behind the screen. It did, and that cargo ship carried depth charges. The secondary explosion was monstrous, equivalent to dozens of depth charges detonating at once. The shockwave capsized nearby vessels, ruptured hulls, and damaged shafts and propellers on ships that would otherwise have survived. One torpedo created damage comparable to a full bombing raid. David ordered Harder down deep and slow, crawl speed, slipping away while Japanese destroyers dropped depth charges into water filled with nothing but their own debris and acoustic clutter. Minutes later, Harder surfaced at distance. The crew counted the results. The convoy had ceased to exist as a coordinated force. Several ships sank outright. Many were damaged beyond operational capability. Others burned, scattered, or drifted helpless. And the most unsettling detail was this: the Japanese still didn't fully understand what had hit them, or from where. 6 torpedoes, 24 ships neutralized. 0 damage to Harder. David's after-action report contained one line: timing defeats numbers. Harder reached friendly waters, and David radioed Pacific Fleet. Engaged convoy. All targets neutralized, returning to base. Fleet Command doubted it until reconnaissance aircraft photographed Blacket Strait filled with wreckage, oil slicks, and burning holes across miles of ocean. Japanese radio intercepts confirmed the loss of an entire convoy to an unknown submarine attack. David was awarded a second Navy Cross. When asked how he did it, his explanation was always the same. Japanese follow patterns. Patterns have timing. Timing has gaps. I attack the gaps. The story spread through the submarine fleet. David became known as the Clockwork Commander. Commanders requested briefings. Doctrine quietly shifted. Close-range formation penetration, once considered reckless, began to look like the future. David requested immediate return to patrol. In May 1945, he intercepted a Japanese task force near Palawan. Destroyers escorting troop transports carrying thousands of soldiers bound for Luzon. Standard approach said, sink the transports, retreat from escorts. David did what he always did. He studied the geometry and timing. The destroyers formed a pentagonal screen, a textbook defense, but even a perfect shape has recurring gaps when moving parts follow a schedule. David attacked during those gaps, disabling propulsion instead of chasing instant kills. With escorts crippled and unable to maintain coverage, he sank the transports. The mission ended with Harder untouched. It was proof the convoy disaster wasn't luck. It was method. When the war ended in August 1945, the Navy offered David promotion and a role in submarine development. He declined. "I'm a clock repairman," he told an admiral. "I just happen to repair combat clocks." He returned to Portland, Maine, opened a watch repair shop, and spent decades fixing timepieces, while most people had no idea what the quiet man behind the counter had done in Blacket Strait. He rarely spoke about the war. When Navy documentarians visited years later and asked for interviews, he politely refused. "It was just math," he said, "nothing special about math." But people kept coming. In the early 1970s, a young submarine officer stationed in Maine recognized David's name and visited the shop, asking about Blacket Strait. David, older now, worked on a pocket watch without looking up. The officer asked, "Sir, how did you know the Japanese formation pattern would hold?" David adjusted a gear with tweezers and answered without drama. "Everything with moving parts runs on patterns. Patterns have timing. You just have to watch long enough to see the repetition." The officer pressed, "But what if the pattern changed?" David finally looked up. "Then I would have died," he said. "Patterns don't change unless someone decides to change them. And people don't change patterns that haven't failed yet." He returned to the watch. "That's the advantage. Everyone assumes their pattern works until it kills them." Malcolm David died on January 8, 1983 in Portland, Maine at age 69. His headstone lists his name, rank, and years. No mention of ships destroyed, no mention of tactics that rewrote submarine warfare. His shop closed. Tools were donated. Patrol logs were archived. Researchers occasionally studied them. Most people forgot the name. There is a small plaque listing top submarine commanders by ships destroyed, and David ranks among them. But Blacket Strait is often blurred in official memory, credited to broader convoy action rather than the precision of one mind. David never corrected the record. Some stories don't fit on headstones. There are two ways to tell what happened. The legend says David was a genius who destroyed a convoy through courage and innovation. The documented record says he was a methodical officer who exploited doctrine weaknesses with probability and timing. Both are true, but what matters is this: he didn't win through greater firepower. He won through superior observation. 24 ships followed a pattern designed to protect them, and that pattern became the trap. Good tactics, followed rigidly, become predictable. Every formation has gaps. Every pattern has timing. Every system built for protection eventually creates the weakness that can destroy it, if someone watches long enough to see it. Years later, a student once asked David if he was afraid during Blacket Strait. David thought for a moment and answered like a man describing weather. "Fear comes from uncertainty. Once I understood their pattern, there was no uncertainty, only execution. The only fear was that I miscounted seconds." That principle echoes beyond the Pacific. In another era, another war, analysts studied defensive systems not to overpower them, but to understand their timing. In 1983, Soviet early warning computers detected what appeared to be incoming missiles and demanded immediate retaliation. One officer, Stanislav Petrov, recognized the pattern didn't match real attack behavior. He waited. The alarm was false. Millions lived because someone understood that rigid defensive patterns, followed automatically, can kill faster than the threat itself. The lesson is simple and ruthless. The strongest defense becomes a fatal vulnerability the moment someone watches long enough to see its pattern. Malcolm David once wrote a question in a journal later stored in main archives. If you can measure it, can you exploit it? If you can time it, can you break it? Blacket Strait answered yes. David spent a lifetime fixing clocks because clocks are visible patterns. Visible patterns are solvable puzzles, and solvable puzzles, given enough observation, always reveal their weakness. He died with a stopwatch in his pocket, still counting. His pocket still counting. His pocket still counting. His pocket